I'd been planning the trip for months without telling anyone. That sounds reckless now, but at the time it felt like a good thing. I wanted peace. I wanted to unplug. I didn't want phone calls or texts. I didn't want anyone to ask me if I was okay. I'd just gotten out of a long-term relationship, and my head was heavy all the time. I thought a few days off the grid would fix something in me. I found the cabin on an old hiking forum. It was just a short post. Some guy mentioned it offhand, like a memory. He said he and his brother found a remote hunting cabin while mapping an old trail system in northern Minnesota. He said it looked abandoned, but it had a stove and a cot, and the door still locked. That was enough for me. I sent him a private message, and a few days later, he replied with GPS coordinates. He even included a little hand-drawn map scanned from a notebook, showing how to reach the cabin from a fire road that branched off a main trail. I knew how stupid it was to go without telling someone, but I didn't want anyone talking me out of it. I made up a story about visiting a friend up north, loaded up my old Subaru, and drove through the night to the edge of the Superior National Forest. I parked on a gravel turnoff around 4 a.m. and slept in the car until the sun came up. Then I packed my gear, locked up the car, and started hiking. I had a 40-liter pack with food, a water filter, a sleeping bag, and a small hatchet I'd brought more for peace of mind than anything. I wore layered clothes, solid boots, and had a big Nalgene full of water strapped to the side of my pack. I felt prepared. I wasn't. The hike wasn't easy. The map from the forum guy was hand-drawn, and the trail it showed wasn't marked. It was more like a faded animal path than anything official. I kept checking my GPS, comparing it to the map. It took me 6 hours to reach the area where the cabin was supposed to be. I nearly gave up twice, thinking I must have gone the wrong way, but then I saw it through the trees. It was rough but solid. The roof was sagging a bit in the middle, and the wood was gray and split from weather, but it stood straight. The door had a latch with a rusted padlock on it, but it was unlocked and swinging a little in the wind. Inside, it was just a single room, maybe 12 by 12 feet. There was a steel wood stove in one corner, a cot made of bent metal frame and old canvas, and a small wooden table with one chair. Mice had chewed up the corners of a thick wool blanket folded on the cot, and there was a ring of rust on the stove where rain must have dripped in through a crack in the roof, but it was still better than I expected. I swept out the mouse droppings and unpacked my sleeping bag. I opened a few windows to air it out, then walked a little farther down the ridge to find a stream I'd passed on the way up. I filtered a few bottles of water, washed my hands, and just sat there for a while. It was so quiet. The only sounds were birds, the wind in the trees, and the soft gurgle of the stream. I felt better already. That night, I lit a small fire in the stove using twigs and one of the fire starter cubes I brought. It wasn't cold, but it made me feel like I was really out there. I heated a pouch of dehydrated chili and ate it with a spoon while sitting on the cot. I read a paperback by Headlamp and turned in early. I expected to sleep like a rock, but I kept waking up. The wind had picked up and made the cabin creak. The metal roof popped loudly a few times as it cooled. Once, I swore I heard footsteps outside, but when I looked out the window, there was nothing but darkness and trees. I told myself it was an animal, probably a deer. The second day was better. I hiked around, explored the area a bit, and even found a little deer blind made of sticks not far from the ridge. I saw moose tracks in the mud and a half-rotted old deer skull with the jaw missing. It felt wild and forgotten, which is what I wanted. I stayed 2 more nights. The mornings were cold, and the evenings were colder. I stopped lighting the stove just for comfort and started doing it for warmth. The second night, I woke up with my nose freezing and had to fumble with matches in the dark. It was the third night when things got weird. It started with a sound. I was dozing in my sleeping bag with my headlamp off. The fire in the stove had gone down to coals, but it was still giving off some heat. I heard something knock on the outside wall of the cabin. Just a single knock, then silence. I sat up, listening. Another knock, this time on the back wall. I grabbed my flashlight and turned it on, sweeping it across the room. Nothing inside. I got up, turned on my headlamp, and slowly opened the door. There was no one. I stepped out into the cold night air, shining my light around the cabin. Nothing. I told myself again it was probably an animal, maybe a porcupine rubbing against the wood or a raccoon looking for food. Still, I didn't sleep much the rest of the night. In the morning, I saw tracks in the dirt. Not animal tracks, boot prints, human. They circled the cabin. I followed them for a few yards into the woods, then lost them in the underbrush. My heart was pounding. It had to be someone hiking through, I thought. A hunter, maybe. But they hadn't come to say anything. They hadn't knocked on the door. They just walked around the cabin and left. I considered leaving that day, but it would take hours to hike out, and I was tired. I told myself I'd leave first thing the next morning. I had one more night to get through. That last night was the worst. I made sure to lock the door with the old padlock and even stacked the chair under the latch. I put my pack near the bed and kept my hatchet under the cot. I didn't light the stove. I didn't want any light. I lay in the dark, eyes wide open, listening. Around midnight, I heard the doorknob turn. Not jiggle, turn. Like someone was testing it slowly, carefully. Then a soft knock. Then another. I held my breath. The knocking stopped. Silence for maybe 5 minutes. Then a scraping noise on the back wall, like metal on wood. It went on for several minutes, slow and steady. I didn't move. I just lay there, gripping the handle of the hatchet, heart racing so fast it felt like I could barely breathe. It stopped eventually. I don't know how much time passed. Could have been hours. I must have fallen asleep at some point because I woke up to daylight. I got up, opened the door, and looked around. The chair was still against the door. The padlock was still in place. But outside, I saw the same boot prints. Fresh. A new set looping around the cabin again. They stopped at the back wall where I heard the scraping. There was a mark on the wood. Deep grooves. Someone had used a knife or something sharp to carve a long vertical line from the roofline almost to the ground. Just a single line. Not a symbol, not a letter. Just a mark, like a warning. I packed up fast. I didn't eat. I didn't refill my water. I just shoved everything into my bag and left. I didn't stop. I didn't take breaks. My legs were jelly and my back hurt, but I kept going. I made it to my car in 5 hours. When I got there, I found something tucked under my windshield wiper. It was a piece of birch bark, curled and dry. On the back, someone had written with a black Sharpie or marker, "Next time, don't lock the door." That was it. No signature, no joke, no explanation. I got in the car and drove. I didn't even check the back seat. I just drove until I reached Duluth. I found a motel and slept with the lights on. I wanted to tell someone, but what would I say? That I broke into an abandoned cabin and got scared when someone else showed up? I didn't want to admit how careless I'd been. I didn't tell anyone. I never reported it. I deleted the GPS coordinates and the guy's message. I never went back to that forum again. I haven't been camping alone since. I still love the woods, but I stay in parks now. Places with rangers, other hikers, cell service. I tell people where I'm going. I bring a satellite tracker. I learned my lesson. I think about that trip sometimes. I wonder if it was just a drifter, someone using the cabin for shelter. Maybe I stumbled into their spot. Maybe they were just warning me not to come back. But part of me thinks they weren't living there. They weren't sleeping there. They were waiting, and they knew I was coming. I don't usually do things on my own. I'm not one of those people who takes solo trips to find themselves or goes hiking in the middle of nowhere just for the thrill. I like structure. I like safety. I like being around people. But back in October of 2022, things weren't normal in my life. I had just gone through a messy breakup. My job was getting unbearable. Every day felt like I was dragging myself through thick mud. One of my coworkers, who knew I was struggling, offered to let me borrow his family's old hunting cabin for a long weekend. He said it was quiet and remote, just what I needed to clear my head. I wasn't sure about it at first, but after another week of barely sleeping and snapping at everyone, I decided to go. The cabin was off County Road 12 in northern Michigan. The directions he gave me were written on a piece of yellow notepad paper. It was that kind of place, no GPS signal, no phone service, not even a clear address. He told me to follow the main road for 20 miles, then take a dirt road that veered off near a rusted mailbox with no number. From there, it was another 5 miles of rough terrain until I reached the cabin. I left on a Thursday morning. I packed light, just a few days worth of clothes, some canned food, water, a flashlight, a hatchet, and a little camping stove in case the power didn't work. He had warned me the place was old, said the power came from a small generator behind the shed, and that I'd probably be better off just using the fireplace and lanterns. I didn't mind. I wanted to disconnect. No emails, no phone calls, no people, just quiet. The drive up was peaceful. The further I got from the city, the more the trees closed in around the road. It was late October, and the leaves were deep red and orange. Every now and then, a gust of wind would send a pile of them flying across the road in waves. I had the windows down, and the cold air actually felt good for once. It took me about 6 hours to get to the turnoff. I almost missed the mailbox. He wasn't kidding about it being rusted to hell. The dirt road beyond it looked like it hadn't been driven on in months. Branches stuck out across the path, and the leaves on the ground had built up into thick piles that crunched under my tires. I kept going, crawling along in my SUV. Every now and then I had to stop and move a branch out of the way or drive real slow over deep ruts. About 20 minutes later, I came around a bend and saw the cabin. It was small, maybe 20 feet by 30. Dark brown wood, faded from years of sun and rain. The roof was sloped and covered in moss, and there was a little porch out front with a rocking chair tipped on its side. To the left was a shed with a tin roof and a stack of chopped wood next to it. Everything looked tired. Not abandoned, but definitely not cared for recently. I parked the car and got out. The air was crisp and totally silent. Not quiet like the city at night. Silent like no one had been out here in weeks. No cars, no voices, not even birds. Just the faint rustle of leaves and the occasional creak of trees swaying. I went up the steps, unlocked the door with the key he had given me, and stepped inside. The inside was basic, wooden floors, a couch that looked like it belonged in a 1970s motel, a small table with 2 chairs, and a stone fireplace at the far end, a small kitchenette with a sink, a 2-burner stove, and a mini fridge sat off to the side. There was one bedroom in the back with a twin bed and an old dresser. There was no TV, no radio, no clock, just a few oil lamps, some books with cracked spines, and a stack of newspapers from last year. It smelled like dust and pine. I spent the first few hours settling in. I unpacked, brought in firewood, checked the generator. It worked but sounded rough, and lit a fire in the fireplace to chase the chill out of the room. Once the sun started going down, I made a simple dinner on the stove, canned chili and crackers, and ate while watching the fire crackle. I went to bed early. There was nothing else to do. I didn't sleep great, though. Every creak of the wood or groan of the wind outside made me snap my eyes open. I was used to city noise, constant traffic, sirens, the hum of neighbors. Out here, the silence felt louder than any of that. The next morning, I got up with the sun. I made some instant coffee on the stove and sat on the porch. It was cold, but the fresh air felt good. For the first time in weeks, I felt like I could breathe. I spent the day walking around the property. There was a path behind the shed that led into the woods, so I followed it. The trees were thick, and the ground was covered in leaves and soft moss. I didn't go too far, just enough to get a feel for the area. I marked my path by tying a red bandana to a tree limb just in case. I didn't want to get turned around. That night, I felt better. I even started thinking maybe this trip had been a good idea. The quiet was starting to settle into me, and for once, I didn't feel overwhelmed. But everything changed that second night. I had just laid down, the fire was burning low, and I was starting to drift off when I heard a sound outside. At first, I thought it was just a tree branch falling or an animal moving around. But then I heard it again. This steady crunching of leaves, slow and even, like footsteps. I held my breath and listened. The sound stopped. I sat up in bed, heart thudding. I told myself it could be a deer, or maybe a raccoon. But then I heard it again. Closer this time. Crunch. Pause. Crunch. It sounded like someone was walking around the cabin, slow and careful, like they didn't want to be heard. I got up and went to the front window. I didn't want to turn on a light. I just crouched there and peeked through the curtain. I couldn't see anything. It was pitch black outside. The porch had no light, and the fire wasn't bright enough to shine through the window. Then the sound moved around to the side of the cabin, toward the back door. I froze. I didn't have a gun, just a hatchet I had used earlier to split some wood. I grabbed it and stood still, listening. The sound stopped again. For a few minutes, there was nothing. Then I heard the back doorknob rattle. Not hard, just a soft jiggle, like someone was testing it to see if it was locked. My blood ran cold. I crept to the back room as quietly as I could and stared at the door. There was no window on it, just solid wood. I stood there, gripping the hatchet so hard my hand ached. But whoever it was didn't try to force it. After a moment, I heard the leaves crunch again, moving away. I waited. 10 minutes, then 20. Finally, I dared to move. I stayed up the rest of the night, sitting in a chair with the hatchet across my lap, staring at the door. When the sun came up, I went outside. I didn't see anything at first, but then I walked around to the back and saw them. Footprints, human, clear as day in the dirt and leaves. They circled the cabin once, then went off into the woods. I packed my bag. I was ready to leave, but when I got in the SUV and turned the key, it just clicked. The engine didn't turn over. I tried again. Nothing. The battery wasn't dead, the dash lights came on. I popped the hood and looked around, but I don't know much about engines. Everything looked fine, but it wouldn't start. I was stuck. I went back inside, locked every door and window, and sat by the fire trying to stay calm. I told myself I'd walk out in the morning. It would take a few hours, but I knew the way. I had food, water, and a flashlight. That night, it came back. Same footsteps, same slow circling. This time, I didn't wait to be scared. I grabbed the hatchet and stood by the back door, breathing slow, heart pounding. The steps stopped again at the back. I held my breath. Then something slid under the door. I looked down. It was a Polaroid photo. I bent down and picked it up with shaking fingers. It was a picture of the cabin, from the woods, taken during the day. My SUV was in it. Someone had been watching me. I didn't sleep that night. I sat with my back against the wall, staring at the door. When the sun came up, I got ready. I stuffed food and water into a backpack, put the hatchet on my belt, and stepped outside. There were more footprints, at least 2 sets now. One coming from the woods, another going back. My chest felt tight, but I forced myself to keep moving. I followed the path out, checking the bandana I'd tied. But less than 10 minutes down the trail, I found something that made me stop cold. My bandana was gone. Not on the tree, not on the ground, just gone. And the trees looked different. The path didn't look the same. I kept walking, but after another 10 minutes, I realized I was going in circles. I sat down and tried not to panic. Eventually, I turned back. I figured I'd try the SUV again. Maybe it was just cold or something simple I had missed. When I got back to the cabin, I saw smoke. Someone had lit a fire in the pit behind the shed. I ran up, hatchet in hand, but no one was there. Just a small fire, still smoking, with a half-burned Polaroid stuck in the coals. It was me, sitting on the porch yesterday. I didn't go inside. I ran to the shed, grabbed the gas can, and dumped it into the SUV. I'm not sure why I picked that cabin. It was late September, and I had time off I hadn't used. I wanted to go somewhere quiet, alone, with no phone calls or emails. Work had been weighing me down, and I needed something that didn't include people or screens or noise. I didn't want beaches. I didn't want hotels. I didn't want anything popular. I wanted quiet, woods, water if I could get it. Just space to breathe. I found the place online. It was buried in a site that listed smaller, owner-rented cabins in rural areas. The photos were grainy, like they were taken with a phone from 2010. Just 4 pictures. One showed the cabin from a distance, a small, dark wood structure tucked into thick trees. Another was the living room, a stone fireplace, a single couch, wood walls. Third was a picture of a dock on a still lake. The last one showed a kitchen with a narrow window over the sink. The trees pressing in from all sides. It was cheap, suspiciously cheap. But the listing said no Wi-Fi, no cable, no service. So I figured most people skipped it because of that. I liked the idea of being disconnected. I clicked book now without thinking much more about it. I packed light. I brought a week's worth of food, some bottled water, a flashlight, batteries, a first aid kit, 2 books I'd been meaning to read, and an old hunting knife my uncle gave me when I was a kid. I wasn't expecting trouble, but I packed it out of habit. I tossed in a blanket and a few extra clothes, filled my gas tank, and drove north. The drive was long, almost 6 hours. At some point, the paved roads turned into gravel. Then gravel turned to dirt. The trees got taller. Cell signal vanished about 30 minutes from the property. My GPS froze on the screen and never refreshed. I had printed the directions, thank God, because the last few turns were barely roads at all. Just overgrown trails marked with wooden signs so weathered they were almost unreadable. When I got there, the place was exactly like the pictures, just darker. The trees were so thick it felt like the cabin was in a bowl of shadows. The air was damp, not quite cold, but cold enough to make me think of October. It was quiet. No birds, no insects, just wind and the occasional groan of tree branches above. The key was in a little metal box on the porch with a code. I opened the door, creaked like it hadn't been touched in weeks. Inside, it smelled like wood, dust, and faint mold. But it was clean enough. Rustic, yeah, but not dirty. There was 1 bedroom, a small kitchen, and the living room with the fireplace. The dock was a short walk through the trees out back. I found it later that evening and stood there for a while, staring at the black water. It was so still it looked like glass. There were no sounds, no bugs, no fish jumping. Just silence and that faint, swampy smell of still water. The first night passed without much. I started a fire, read for a bit, made canned soup, and went to bed early. I felt good. No screens, no distractions. Just wind in the trees and the warmth of the fire. I slept like a rock. The second day, I explored a little. There wasn't much around, just woods in every direction. The trees were thick and tall, mostly pine, with a few maples and birch scattered around. I walked along the edge of the lake for a while. It was round, not too big, and I never saw another house or dock. I guessed it was private. That night, something felt different. I started hearing things in the woods. Not animals, not exactly, more like snapping twigs, shuffling. A few times I thought I saw movement just past the trees, like someone stepping behind a trunk just as I turned my head. I told myself it was deer, maybe a bear. I tried to ignore it, but when I was in bed that night, I heard footsteps on the porch. Not animals. Slow, heavy, human footsteps. I froze. The cabin had 1 front door and 1 back door, both locked. There were 2 small windows in the bedroom. I listened for a long time, holding my breath. The steps stopped. I waited. I don't know how long. Maybe 15 minutes. Maybe more. Eventually, I heard the creak of the steps again, this time moving away. I didn't sleep much after that. In the morning, I checked the porch. Nothing. No footprints, no marks. The ground was too dry. I felt stupid. Maybe I imagined it. Maybe I was dreaming, but I couldn't shake it. I went to the dock that day, sat with my feet hanging over the edge, trying to relax. But even then, I felt like someone was watching me, like eyes on the back of my neck. I kept turning around. Nothing, just trees. But I couldn't shake it. That night, I moved a chair in front of the door. I locked both doors again and kept the fire going longer than usual. I sat with the knife on my lap. I kept hearing things outside. A soft tap against the wall. A rustle under the window. Then nothing. At some point, I must have fallen asleep in the chair. I woke up to a loud bang. I jumped. The fire was almost out. It was still dark. The bang had come from the back door. I crept toward it, holding the knife tight. The door was still shut, locked, but the doorknob was wet. My hand shook when I touched it. It was slick, not rain. It hadn't rained. It smelled like metal, like blood. I didn't open the door. I backed away and sat in the corner until the sun came up. That morning, I told myself I had to leave. I packed up my things and loaded the car. But when I turned the key, the engine didn't turn over. I tried again. Nothing. Battery was dead. I opened the hood. Everything looked fine. I checked the battery cables. Still connected. I don't know a lot about cars, but I know enough to spot a loose cable. Nothing looked off. The nearest town was over 20 miles away. I had no cell service, no GPS, no radio, nothing. I was stuck. I spent the day trying to calm down. I went back inside, moved the couch in front of the door this time. I made a plan. In the morning, I'd pack water and food and hike out. I didn't like the idea of walking all day through the woods, but it was better than staying. That night, it all fell apart. I had just laid down when I heard something scraping on the back door. Slow, deliberate, metal against wood. Then a long pause. Then a voice. Not words, just a sound. A grunt, low, breathy, like someone clearing their throat. I sat up, heart hammering. I waited. I didn't breathe. Then I heard it again. Another scrape. I crawled into the kitchen and grabbed a cast iron pan from the rack. I held it in one hand, the knife in the other, and waited near the wall where I could hear better. The scraping stopped. Then a thud. Then nothing. I stayed like that for an hour. Then two. Sometime after that, I passed out sitting up. When I woke, it was morning. The door was still shut, but something had been written on it, with something dark and sticky like mud or blood. Said one word, stay. I almost vomited. I don't know how long I sat there staring at it. I wiped it off with a rag, throwing the rag out into the woods when I was done. I packed faster than I ever have in my life. I filled a bag with food and water, slung it over my shoulder, and left. I didn't lock the door. I didn't look back. I started walking. The trail I came in on was narrow and overgrown. I followed it for what felt like hours. At one point, I thought I heard footsteps behind me, but every time I stopped, they stopped. I walked faster. I didn't stop for food. I barely drank water. I just kept walking. Eventually, I found a road. A real one. Gravel, but wide enough for cars. I followed it. A few miles later, a pickup truck came around the bend. I stepped into the middle of the road and waved it down. The guy was in his 50s, looked confused to see me. I told him I'd been staying at the cabin and my car died. I didn't mention the rest. He gave me a ride into town. I called a tow truck, got my car brought in, and paid to have it fixed. The mechanic said the battery was drained completely, like something had been left on all night. But I hadn't. I double-checked everything before bed, every night. Still, I nodded, paid him, and left. I didn't go back to the cabin. I left a message for the owner online, said the place gave me the creeps and I'd left early. I didn't get a reply. I reported the listing. It disappeared a week later. I still don't know who was out there. Maybe someone was squatting in the woods. Or maybe it was just some backwoods creep messing with me. Maybe they saw I was alone, saw me arrive, and decided I was an easy target. I'll never know what they wanted. But I do know this. I'll never go that deep into the woods alone again. And I'll never trust a listing with only 4 pictures. I needed a break. That's how it all started. I wasn't dealing with anything major like heartbreak or tragedy. Nothing like that. I was just worn down, burnt out really. I work in construction management, and the jobs had been piling up for months with no break. Between deadlines, supply delays, and dealing with the kind of people who scream on the phone at 7 a.m., I felt like I was losing track of myself. So when my boss finally agreed to give me a full week off, I didn't tell anyone. Not even my sister, who I usually call every Sunday. I packed up my old 4Runner, grabbed some groceries, and drove out to a remote cabin I'd found on a rental site. It was up in the northern part of Minnesota, about a 4-hour drive from where I lived. The ad said it was built in the 70s, had no Wi-Fi, no TV, and barely any cell signal. Just a wood stove, some propane lamps, and access to a nearby lake. That was exactly what I wanted. The drive out there was peaceful. Once I got past the last town, the 2-lane road narrowed, then turned to gravel. I passed a few other cabins, but after a while, even those disappeared. It was nothing but pine trees, birch, and thick forest as far as the eye could see. The kind of place where the air smells like earth and sap, where the only sounds are the wind and your tires on the road. I reached the cabin just before dark. It was tucked about 200 feet off a narrow dirt road, with a little gravel area to park. No neighbors in sight. The structure itself was small and square, with a steep roof and a covered porch. The wood siding was weathered but in decent shape. A stack of firewood was neatly piled beside the porch, and the key was exactly where the owner said it would be, under a stone frog near the steps. Inside, it was basic but clean. There was one main room with a bed, a small table, a couch, and the wood stove. A kitchenette area had a propane stove, a cooler, and some cabinets. The bathroom was just a composting toilet in a little back room, no shower. I didn't mind. I wiped everything down, opened the windows to air the place out, and built a fire in the stove. That first night was exactly what I needed. Quiet, dark, and cold. I sat by the fire, reading an old paperback I found in the drawer. I drank 2 beers and listened to the wind in the trees. Felt like my brain had finally unclenched. The next morning, I made coffee on the stove, ate a granola bar, and hiked down to the lake. It wasn't far, maybe 10 minutes through the woods. The lake was still half covered in ice, with a little dock poking out near the edge. I sat there for a while, watching the wind ripple over the water. Then I headed back, chopped some wood, and spent most of the afternoon clearing out the trail around the cabin with a handsaw and some loppers I'd brought. It felt good to work with my hands again, but without any pressure. Just doing things on my own time. The second night was colder. I heard some coyotes yipping off in the distance and maybe an owl or two. The wind picked up at some point, making the trees creak. I woke up around 2 a.m. to the sound of something tapping on the porch railing. Not fast like rain, slow and deliberate. Tap, tap, tap. I sat up in bed, listening. The cabin was dead quiet again. I figured it was just a branch in the wind. I got up, grabbed the flashlight, and shined it through the front window. Nothing out there but the firewood and a bunch of shadows. I went back to bed, not thinking much of it. The next couple days passed peacefully. I settled into a kind of rhythm: coffee, light work, some reading, chopping wood, checking the lake, writing in a little notebook I kept. I didn't hear any more tapping, but I started noticing little things. The pile of wood I stacked looked slightly different the next morning, like someone had shifted it. One morning, I found a footprint in the soft mud near the trail. Not mine, not a boot, barefoot, human, toes and everything. It made my skin crawl. I looked around the woods for a while, trying to find more prints, but nothing. I tried to convince myself it had been there before I arrived, maybe left by a swimmer when the ground was wetter. Still, I didn't feel as relaxed after that. I started locking the cabin door at night, even though I was pretty sure no one was around. I also started carrying my folding knife in my pocket, even when I was just going to the outhouse. Then the worst part started. On the 5th night, just as I was drifting off, I heard the tapping again. This time it was different. It wasn't on the railing, it was on the window, the one above the kitchen sink. The cabin has no curtains. I laid in bed, frozen, heart pounding. The tapping came again. Tap, tap, then nothing. I didn't get up that time. I just waited until dawn, eyes wide open, every tiny creak and pop of the cabin sending a jolt through my chest. When the sun came up, I finally worked up the nerve to check the window. No smudges, no prints. I stepped out onto the porch, scanned the woods. Everything looked normal. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that someone had been out there. I thought about packing up and leaving, but I didn't want to seem paranoid. I told myself I was just spooked by the isolation. That day, I built a little perimeter. Just some string tied around trees with old bottle caps dangling every few feet. It wasn't exactly a security system, but I figured it might alert me if someone tried to sneak up. That night, nothing happened. I almost felt silly. The tapping must have been an animal, maybe a raccoon. That's what I told myself. The string stayed untouched. But the night after, that's when everything unraveled. Started around midnight. I was in bed, reading by lamplight, when I heard one of the bottle caps clink. Just one. I sat perfectly still, straining my ears. Then I heard it again. A light, metallic clink, like someone brushing the string with their hand. It came from the side of the cabin, near the back corner. I turned off the lamp and waited in the dark. The fire had burned down low, so it was almost pitch black inside. I reached under the bed for my flashlight and the hatchet I kept nearby. The third clink came from the opposite side of the cabin. Whoever it was, they were circling. I stood up quietly, went to the window by the table, and slowly pulled it open a crack. I waited. I didn't hear anything for a long time, maybe 10 minutes. Then I heard breathing, heavy, labored breathing, right outside the window. I froze. It was human. I couldn't see anything through the window, just blackness. The breathing stopped, and there was silence. Then came a loud thud on the porch. I jumped, backing away from the window. I moved to the door, latched the deadbolt, then turned off the propane lamp. Something scraped across the wood outside, a dragging sound like metal or stone being pulled. I stood in the dark, gripping the hatchet. I didn't move. My legs started to ache from standing still so long. Minutes passed, maybe hours. The dragging sound came again, slower this time. Then silence. I didn't sleep. I sat in the corner with my back to the wall, watching the windows. Morning finally came. Pale blue light filtered in through the trees. I stepped outside. The bottle cap string had been cut in 2 places, neatly. Not torn, not broken, cut. On the porch, I found a rock about the size of a grapefruit. It had been placed right in front of the door, just sitting there, clean, no moss, not from around here. I packed my bag in 10 minutes flat. I didn't clean up. I didn't care. I threw my gear in the 4Runner and hit the gas. My hands were shaking. I didn't even look back at the cabin. The dirt road felt longer than it should have. Every time I rounded a bend, I expected to see someone standing in the middle of the road, but it stayed empty. I didn't stop until I hit pavement. Then I drove for another hour before pulling into a gas station. I sat there in the parking lot for a long time, engine running, door locked. I didn't call the police. What would I even say? Someone breathed on my window and left a rock on my porch? No one got hurt. Nothing was stolen. But someone was out there, watching me, cutting string in the dark. A few weeks later, I went back on the rental site. The listing was gone. I still don't know who was out there or what they wanted, but I haven't gone back to the woods since, and I never will. I've been needing a break, a real one. No phones, no emails, no traffic sounds, no neighbors mowing their lawns too early in the morning. Just trees, wind, maybe some birds if I was lucky. I booked a small cabin up in northern Minnesota, tucked away from any main roads. I didn't pick it because it had great reviews or anything. I picked it because no one had reviewed it at all. It was cheap, remote, and didn't have any frills. Just a bed, a stove, and 4 walls to keep the wind out. The guy who rented it out sent me an email with directions. Not a GPS link, just written directions like, take the logging road past mile marker 12. Turn right at the green mailbox that looks like it's falling over. That sort of thing. That was fine with me. The fewer people who knew where I was, the better. I packed a cooler full of food, sandwich stuff, granola bars, fruit, a bunch of water bottles, and drove up on a Friday morning. Took me about 5 hours to get there. The last hour was slow, just bouncing along a rutted-out road surrounded by thick woods. When I finally pulled up to the cabin, I was relieved to see it actually existed and looked more or less like the pictures. Wooden, a little weathered, 1 small window on each side, front porch barely hanging on. No cars, no sounds, just me and the trees. I unpacked, settled in, cracked open a beer, and sat on the porch with my feet up on the railing. It felt like something in my chest loosened for the first time in months. The first night was quiet, cold too. I hadn't expected it to dip that low, but I had a thick sleeping bag and layered up. No heat in the place besides a little wood stove in the corner, which took some time to get going. I slept okay. Woke up a few times to silence so thick it almost rang in my ears. I remember laying there wondering how long it had been since I'd heard zero sound at all. No wind, no creaks, nothing. Eventually I fell back asleep. The second day I explored the woods a bit. Didn't go far, just circled the area around the cabin. The trees were dense and tall, mostly pine. The ground was soft with old needles. I didn't see any trails or signs of other people. That was good. That's what I wanted. I spent the evening reading and cooking up a can of soup on the stove. Slept a little better that night. It was the third day when things started to feel off. I'd gone out again after breakfast to gather some firewood. There was a stack near the back of the cabin, but it was old and damp, so I figured I'd collect some dry stuff from farther out. I wandered maybe 100 yards from the cabin, dragging a little sled I found under the porch. Took my time picking up dry branches, tying them with rope, loading them up. After about an hour, I headed back. That's when I noticed something strange. The door to the cabin was closed. That might not sound weird, but I'd left it open. I remembered it clearly because I'd propped it with a rock so it wouldn't swing shut. It didn't have a lock on the outside, just a deadbolt and a knob from the inside, so I didn't see any harm in it. When I walked up, the rock was gone. I figured maybe the wind had blown it shut and knocked the rock aside, but when I tried to open it, it wouldn't budge. It was locked. I stood there with my hand on the doorknob, staring at the wood. I remember that moment clearly, just this slow, dull realization that something wasn't adding up. I hadn't locked the door. Couldn't have. I'd been outside for over an hour, alone. The door could only be locked from the inside. I set down the sled and walked around the cabin. All the windows were shut, just as I'd left them. None were broken. The back door, more like a service entrance by the stove, was shut and locked too. I stood there for a long time, just staring at the cabin. I didn't know what to do. I didn't want to believe someone was inside. That idea felt too crazy, too sudden. I hadn't seen a soul since I arrived. No cars, no footsteps, no trash, no sounds. But the door was locked. I knocked, not sure why. Just 2 light knocks with my knuckle, like I was asking the place itself to let me in. Nothing. I knocked again, louder. Waited. Still nothing. I backed away, checked the windows again. One of them on the left side was cracked open slightly, but the screen was in place. I'd opened it the first day to air the place out and left it that way. It was maybe open 2 inches. I thought about trying to break through it, but I wasn't sure I could fit. I went back to the front, grabbed the sled rope, and sat on the porch. I stayed there for a while, trying to think. I didn't have my phone on me. It was charging inside. My keys, wallet, and everything else were also inside. Only thing I had on me was a pocket knife and my hoodie. I felt stupid more than anything else. Like maybe I'd somehow tricked myself into locking it. Maybe I had gone back in for something and absent-mindedly locked it. But the fact that the door only locked from the inside kept nagging at me. Eventually, I decided to get in through the window. I found a decent stick, tore the screen off the open window, and slowly widened the gap. It scraped the frame, but I was able to push it open far enough to squeeze through. Not easy. I scraped my shoulder and knocked a lamp over on the way in, but I made it. Inside, it looked the same. Nothing was moved. My bag was on the bed, cooler still closed. Phone plugged in by the outlet. I checked every corner of that cabin. The tiny bathroom, the pantry, under the bed, even behind the curtains. Nothing. No one. So who locked the door? I sat on the bed for a long time, thinking about it. Maybe the wind blew it shut and something jammed the lock. Maybe the mechanism got stuck. But the deadbolt had been turned. I saw that clearly from the inside. That night, I slept with my pocket knife under my pillow. I don't know if it was the stress or the cold or something else, but I woke up around 3 a.m. to a sound. Just a single knock. Not loud, not frantic. Just one dull knock on the front door. I sat up, heart pounding, and listened. Nothing else. I didn't move, just sat there, staring at the door. No footsteps, no voice, no movement. I stayed like that until the sky began to turn pale. The next day, I packed my stuff. It was early, maybe 6 a.m., and I didn't even eat. Just tossed everything in my duffel and headed for the car. When I stepped outside, I noticed something that stopped me cold. Footprints. A single trail coming from the woods, leading to the porch. They were faint, like someone had stepped lightly, but they were there. Boot prints. Not mine. Too narrow. They went right up to the door, and none going back. I didn't stick around to investigate. I threw my stuff in the car and got out of there. The ride back felt longer. Every sound on the road behind me made me check my mirror. When I got home, I didn't tell anyone. What would I even say? But a few days later, I checked the cabin listing again. Just curiosity, I guess. It was gone. Listing removed. Post profile deleted. I still don't know what happened out there. Maybe someone had a key. Maybe they lived nearby and saw me arrive. Maybe they waited until I was gone to sneak in and mess with me. Or maybe it was someone who just wanted to scare me and leave no trace. I'll never go back to a place that remote again. Not alone. I keep thinking about those footprints. How they came from the woods. How they never left. I've been working nonstop for almost 2 years. My job wasn't anything glamorous, just a desk job at a logistics company. Mostly spreadsheets, shipments, schedules. I liked the routine, I liked the quiet, but it built up over time. Little by little, I started noticing how tired I was. I didn't sleep well. I drank more coffee than water. My shoulders always hurt from sitting. I'd wake up already stressed, already checking my phone for emails. When I wasn't working, I was just sort of there. Tired, disconnected, like I wasn't really part of anything. It all felt too much, so I decided to get away for a while. I had a week of unused vacation time. I didn't want to go anywhere with people. No hotels, no airports. I didn't want to hear voices or horns or phones. I found this listing for a remote cabin in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan. It wasn't one of those trendy Airbnbs. It looked old, rugged. No Wi-Fi, no cell signal. Just 4 walls, a roof, a small wood stove, and miles of forest. Perfect. The drive was long. Took me almost 10 hours, and by the time I got close, the sun was already low in the sky. The last stretch of road wasn't really a road, just a narrow trail through thick woods, barely wide enough for my car. No signs, no markers. I checked the directions I'd printed. Everything matched. I kept going. Eventually, the trail opened into a small clearing. There was the cabin just like in the pictures. Wooden, dark, slanted roof, a little porch, no other buildings in sight, no other people, just tall trees, wind, and silence. I got out and stood there for a while, breathing in the cool air. I could already feel the tension leaving my body. It was quiet in a way cities never are. No hums, no machines, just trees creaking slightly, maybe a bird somewhere far off. Inside, the cabin was basic. 1 room plus a bathroom in the back. A cot with a heavy blanket. A table. A small shelf with canned food and matches. A little sink that connected to a rain barrel outside. A hand pump for drinking water. I'd brought most of what I needed: canned meals, flashlight, batteries, a hatchet, my own water, a sleeping bag. There was a wood stove in the corner, already stacked with a few logs. A window on each wall, all with dusty curtains. The floor creaked under my boots. I lit a fire that first night and heated up a can of chili. I ate in silence, listening to the popping of the fire. I wrote a little in my notebook. Then I laid down and fell asleep without setting an alarm. It was the best sleep I'd had in years. The next few days were slow and simple. I'd wake up with the light, stretch, boil some water for coffee, sit on the porch and watch the trees. Sometimes it snowed lightly, even though it was early spring. The air stayed cold, but I liked it. I chopped wood, went on little walks through the woods, read old paperbacks. No pressure, no obligations. I didn't even bring my laptop. On the 4th night, something changed. I had just gone to bed. It was late. The fire was dying down, but I didn't mind. I had thick socks and a heavy blanket. I just closed my eyes when I heard something outside. A sound I hadn't heard before. It was faint, a short crunch like a footstep on old snow. I stayed still, listening. Maybe it was an animal, a deer or a fox. I tried to ignore it, but then I heard it again. Another crunch. Closer this time. I sat up slowly. The fire had dimmed, so the cabin was mostly dark. I reached for my flashlight and clicked it on, aiming it toward the front window. The curtains were drawn. I listened. Another footstep. This time it came from around the side of the cabin. I stood and moved to the window, gently pulling the curtain back just a little. I aimed the flashlight through the glass, but the light bounced off the pane, showing nothing but my own reflection. I turned the flashlight off and waited. The wind was picking up a bit now, rustling the trees, but I thought I heard movement again, softer this time, like whoever or whatever it was trying to be quiet. I went back to the cot and grabbed the hatchet I kept near my bag, just in case. I wasn't scared exactly, at least not yet. I was just alert, focused. I stood in the dark, waiting. Eventually, the noises stopped. I didn't sleep much that night. Every time I thought I drifted off, I'd hear another faint sound and jolt awake again. By morning, nothing had happened, but I was exhausted. I walked a wide circle around the cabin once the sun came up. There were boot prints in the snow, leading up to the cabin and circling it. Not mine. These were fresher. The shape was different, bigger than my foot. Whoever it was hadn't come from the road either. The prints came straight out of the woods. I followed them for a while, but they vanished into the trees about 50 yards out. I stood there for a long time listening. Nothing, just wind. I went back inside and locked the door. It only had a simple bolt, no deadbolt. I stacked a few chairs under the doorknob too, just for peace of mind. That day felt different. I stayed close, kept the fire going. Every time I looked at the window, I imagined a face on the other side. I told myself it was just a hunter, maybe someone lost. But deep down, I didn't buy that. A lost person would have knocked. A hunter wouldn't have circled the place at night, walking quietly in the dark. I barely slept that night either. The wind picked up again, louder now. The trees creaked more. No footsteps this time, but I kept the hatchet next to me, my boots on, just in case. On the 6th day, it snowed heavier than it had before. The whole forest looked blanketed, untouched. I walked out again to look for more prints, but there was nothing. No sign of movement. I almost felt relieved. Maybe whoever it was had moved on. Maybe they were just passing through. But then I found something. On the side of the cabin, near the rain barrel, I saw a small plastic wrapper, bright blue, torn. It hadn't been there before. I didn't bring anything like that. I picked it up. It was an empty granola bar wrapper. Not one of mine. I hadn't seen anything like it in the shelf inside either. It meant someone had been close, probably last night, close enough to drop something. I scanned the woods again. Just trees. No movement. That night, I didn't light the fire. I didn't want the smoke to give away that I was inside. I kept all the lights off, sat in the corner of the cabin with the hatchet and flashlight. I waited. Around midnight, I heard it again. Crunch. Pause. Another crunch. Then silence. I stayed still, barely breathing. Then the doorknob rattled. Just slightly. Turned once. Then again. It stopped. I kept the flashlight off. I just stared at the door. The bolt held. The chairs didn't move. After a long pause, the doorknob turned one last time, harder this time. Then nothing. I sat like that until morning. As soon as the sun came up, I packed my stuff. I didn't care about the rest of the vacation. I was done. I threw everything into my bag, tossed water over the fire pit, and carried the bag to my car. I kept looking over my shoulder, expecting to see someone watching me from the trees. But there was no one. I got in and started driving down the trail. My tires slipped a bit on the snow, but I kept going. I just wanted to be back on the main road. After about 10 minutes of careful driving, I saw something that made me stop cold. Halfway down the trail, I saw a small pile of rocks stacked neatly in the middle of the path. 5 or 6 stones arranged like a marker. I hadn't passed it on the way in. It was new. It hadn't snowed since last night, so it must have been made recently. I got out and looked at it. The rocks weren't just tossed together. They were arranged carefully, like someone wanted me to see them. A message? A warning? I kicked them aside and drove on. I didn't stop until I hit the highway. I didn't call the cops. I didn't know what to say. No one hurt me. Nothing was stolen. There was no proof, just footprints and a bad feeling. A few weeks later, I looked up the listing for the cabin again. It was gone, taken down, no contact info. I tried messaging the owner through the platform, but the message bounced. Maybe they took it down. Maybe they knew something. I don't know who was out there. I don't know what they wanted, but they watched me. They waited. They came close, too close, and they didn't make a sound. Not a word, just footsteps in the snow. A hand on the doorknob. I'm back in the city now. I work the same job, same routine. It's not exciting, but I'm safe. I lock my doors. I don't go camping anymore. I don't want silence. I want people. I want lights. I want noise. Sometimes, when it's late and quiet, I remember the sound of footsteps outside my door. I remember the way the doorknob moved, slowly, patiently, and I wonder how long they'd been watching me before I even knew they were there. It started as a solo trip. I had a few weeks off work and no real responsibilities calling me back home, and I thought it'd be a good time to finally do something for myself. I've been working a corporate job for almost a decade, spending most of my time sitting at a desk, staring at 2 computer monitors all day, trying to pretend that it mattered which font we used in the quarterly report. It was burning me out, slowly. I wasn't miserable, just tired in a way I couldn't explain. One afternoon, I was sitting in traffic with the windows down when I heard something on the radio about a forest area being reopened for public recreation. It had been closed off the last few years due to logging and safety concerns. The name caught my attention because I remembered going there as a kid. My uncle used to take me out for short hikes and fishing trips when I was about 10 or 11. My family hadn't been the outdoorsy type, but he was. He died a few years back, and I hadn't been up there since. So I started thinking about it. I looked the place up when I got home, found a few maps, and saw that there were some private cabin rentals posted by owners who maintained their properties near the old logging roads. Most of them looked a little sketchy, but there was one that stood out. A man had built a one-room log cabin on a patch of land his family had owned for 3 generations. No running water, but it had a propane stove and lanterns, and he had recently added a solar battery for charging phones or small electronics. It wasn't on any rental sites, just a personal blog with a contact form. The pictures looked clean, simple, nothing fancy. The cabin was completely surrounded by forest. Nearest neighbor? A 6-mile hike? Or a 45-minute drive down a barely maintained dirt road. I emailed him. We exchanged maybe 2 or 3 short messages, and he gave me the dates. It wasn't cheap, but not overpriced either. The man seemed like the quiet type, just wanted people to enjoy the woods the way he did. I took the dates, paid him through Venmo, and packed for a week in the woods. I brought everything I thought I'd need. A cooler full of ice and food, a sleeping bag, a camp stove, and a few propane canisters just in case. I had a box of books I hadn't touched in years and a notebook I told myself I'd fill with ideas or drawings or whatever came to mind. I didn't expect to have cell signal out there, which was part of the appeal. I didn't tell anyone exactly where I was going, just said I'd be in the mountains for a while. Maybe that was dumb, but I wasn't going to do anything risky. I wasn't hiking far, just enjoying the quiet. I figured a week in that cabin would do more for me than any vacation had in years. The drive up was quiet, long but not hard. Once I turned off the highway, I spent the next hour driving on dirt roads that felt more like old tractor paths. The tires kicked up clouds of dust and small rocks, and the trees got thicker as the elevation climbed. I passed some signs of logging, big stumps, old tire tracks, and the occasional stack of logs that had been left behind for whatever reason. No machines, no fresh activity. Just long scars in the forest where work had stopped. The directions the man gave me were detailed. After the 4th fork in the road, I followed an unmarked gravel path for about 2 miles. Trees pressed in close on both sides. A few times I had to slow down to cross little streams that cut over the road, but my SUV handled it. Finally, the forest opened slightly and I saw it. The cabin. It was smaller than I thought, but solid. built low to the ground with a small porch, a single window in the front, and a thick metal chimney sticking up from the back. The wood was dark from weathering, but I could see that it had been cared for. Someone had oiled the logs, maybe the year before, and the roof looked tight with no sagging. There was a small shed nearby, locked. The area around the cabin had been cleared just enough to let in sunlight and keep the brush back. I parked, stretched, and started unloading. Everything felt peaceful. I could hear birds calling from somewhere high up in the trees. There was a small pile of chopped wood stacked neatly near the porch. No trash, no clutter. It was quiet in a way that made my ears ring. I took a breath and felt, for the first time in a long time, completely alone in the best way. The cabin door was stiff but not locked. Inside was one big room with a small bed frame and a foam mattress, a wooden table with a lantern on top, 2 chairs, a shelf with some old books and maps, and a wood stove in the corner. The walls smelled like cedar and smoke. It was simple, clean, nothing fancy but nothing sketchy either. I set up my gear, organized my food in the cooler, and rolled out my sleeping bag. By the time the sun dipped low, I had a small fire going in the stove. I sat on the porch, drinking a bottle of water and just watching the trees move in the wind. I didn't hear a single car, not one plane, nothing but wind, birds, and the occasional crack of a branch. That first night, I slept better than I had in months. The second day, I took a short hike up one of the old logging roads that curved behind the cabin. It was overgrown but still walkable. I followed it for maybe an hour until it narrowed into something more like a trail. I saw deer prints, no people, no trash, just nature doing its thing. I sat on a fallen log and ate a sandwich while looking out over a valley. The trees were thick, layered in deep green. Somewhere down below, a river ran, but I couldn't see it, just heard it in the distance. Back at the cabin, I spent the afternoon reading, sketching, and chopping a few pieces of wood for practice. I made dinner on the propane stove and sat in silence as the fire inside the cabin crackled low. That night, something woke me up. I didn't know what it was at first, just opened my eyes in the dark and felt off, like I was being watched. Not scared, not really, just aware. I listened. The forest outside was quiet, too quiet. No bugs, no owls, just silence. I sat up and looked through the small window, but saw nothing, just darkness. I told myself it was just my brain reacting to the total isolation. No city sounds, no headlights, nothing to anchor my senses. I climbed back into my sleeping bag and eventually drifted off. The third day was colder. The wind had shifted and brought in a damp smell. Maybe rain was coming. I stayed close to the cabin. I started a small fire in the fire ring outside and cooked some sausages on a stick. Mid-afternoon, I heard something that made me freeze. An engine, faint, far off, but definitely a vehicle. I turned and listened hard. It came from the direction of the main road, but I couldn't see anything. The cabin sat in a small depression surrounded by trees, and the road was out of sight. Still, I heard tires crunching gravel and then silence. Maybe someone checking on the logging area. Maybe another cabin owner. Nothing strange. Still, it put me a little on edge. I hadn't seen another person since I got there, and I'd gotten used to the solitude quickly. The sound of a car reminded me that I wasn't really that far from the world, just hidden. That night, something else happened. I woke up again. Same feeling as before. Alert, like my body knew something I didn't. I sat up slowly and waited. Then I heard it. Crunch. A footstep. Outside the cabin. I froze. My ears strained. I heard it again. Crunch. Pause. Crunch. Not an animal. 2 legs. Moving slow. My heart picked up. I didn't have a weapon. My pocket knife was small, just a tool. I had a hatchet, but it was out on the porch where I'd left it earlier. I waited, not daring to move. The footsteps stopped near the window. I didn't look. Couldn't. I didn't breathe. Then nothing. No knock. No call. Just silence. I sat there for what felt like an hour. I don't think I blinked. Eventually, I laid back down without sleeping. In the morning, I opened the door slowly and stepped outside. I looked around. Nothing. No boot prints, no broken branches. Just leaves and mud. Still, I felt different. The peace I'd felt was gone. I told myself it could have been a deer or a raccoon, something stepping through the leaves. Maybe I'd imagined the pattern, but it had sounded like footsteps. Human. I spent the day keeping close. I read, but I didn't focus. I cooked food, but I barely ate. I kept the axe near me now. I even brought it inside at night. The fourth night was quiet. Too quiet. No dreams. No sounds. In the morning, I saw something that made me sick. Near the back of the cabin, where the trees grew tight together, I found cigarette butts. 3 of them, half buried in the dirt. Fresh. Not there before. I don't smoke. No one had been up there but me. My stomach dropped. I started scanning the trees, looking for movement. Listening. Nothing. I went back inside and locked the door. As if that would matter. That day I debated leaving. I had 3 days left on the rental, but the tension had drained everything out of me. I packed some food, loaded it in the car, and sat for a while. Then I made a decision. I'd stay one more night, but I'd leave at sunrise. I didn't want to drive those roads in the dark.